Well, thank you everybody for joining us for another one of the Siemens webinars. Today we're going to get a chance to explore the topic of Service and Maintenance 101. So we are specifically using the 101 scenario because this is really hopefully your first exposure into some of the service topics and functionality within our control. We will build on this moving forward. So we're kind of thinking about already doing a second and maybe a third of this type of series, getting more into some of the back-end functions, because a lot of times we certainly cover topics from an operation and programming perspective, but we don't necessarily get a chance to do topics from the service side. So with that being said, I was a little premature there. I am your host today, and I am specifically going to be your host. Presenter is going to actually be Steve Holmes. Some of you heard his voice in the background there when we did our audio checks, and I'll transition you over to Steve here in a minute. We're going to kind of tag team this one a little bit today. You guys will get to see a little different angle of an event. But before we do that, a couple of things I do like to go. I certainly always like to plug some upcoming events, and I specifically put what should we do next year, because we are at the end of our fiscal year. So we're looking to see kind of what topics we should move forward with coming up in the next year. So I'd love to get your input as an audience. If there's topics we haven't touched upon, or maybe topics we have but you'd like us to elaborate on it, please feel free to email me and kind of let me know. I would certainly love to get the perspective of our core customers or our audience here as to what kind of material we should get into in the future. So certainly always check out our CNC4U webpage. This is where all of our post webinars are stored. Certainly the link to register for the current webinar or see what's coming up will be put there. We have a whole series of training classes that we offer that are on there, both physical and virtual, as well in the virtual tag. If you want to get a download of all of the digital content we've done up till now, we have this Sinumerik CNC Content Manager link that'll download an Excel spreadsheet. And basically what it has hyperlinks to all of our material, whether it's on YouTube or on CNC4U or one of our other websites. So it's a great resource, certainly for yourselves or to share with colleagues, kind of like a one-stop shop. So instead of having to bounce between our YouTube channel or our CNC4U, if there's specific material you're looking for, this doc will even make recommendations for you. So you use your pull downs, you kind of tell it what your skill level is or what your technology interest is. Like, hey, I'm an advanced user, I do milling, and I'm interested in shop floor programming, and the doc will automatically highlight the material you should kind of concentrate on. So pretty good resource for you. Additionally, we mentioned it, we do have our training classes. Now, it's I'll be honest, it's been a bit of a challenge getting the in-person training classes out at Elk Grove Village kind of off the ground with our current state of affairs with COVID and everything that's going on with it. So what we have been doing is we've been attempting to run those. We've run a few, but we've transitioned a lot of that stuff over to online classes. So I would say, I'm assuming a lot of people here are on the contact list. If you're not, you definitely want to sign up for the contact list. You can do it right from CNC4U or email me. I'll get you the link. But we are now offering instructor-led online classes. It's kind of a cool way to approach it. So you'll actually be able to interface with one of the instructors, whether it be myself or Randy Pearson, who's been doing the bulk of them. And we basically break the material down. We give a couple-hour lecture each morning, and then we give you some homework assignments. And it's actually been working out pretty well. And we use Sinutrain as the driver there. So if you're interested, like I said, make sure you're on our mailing list and check out some of these classes. The next class comes up, we will certainly be promoting there. And if you guys don't know, certainly check out the Mr. CNC channel. That's our YouTube channel. We have a lot of, the webinars are certainly posted there post-event, but we also do our YouTube live or our Simply Sinumerik live segment that we like to call it, which is a half-hour live interaction with me in front of a machine, and we actually do some real-world applications. So I got one coming up on September 24th. We're going to get into deep hole drilling, so certainly check that out. You can see the links on the channel. And we also have a relatively new initiative, I guess you'd like to call it, that we have been promoting, our virtual product expert. So that's a way where you guys can actually block out time, usually hour segments, specifically with a product specialist. The program's being managed by my colleague, Daniel Vitullo. So if you're interested in kind of all topics Sinumeric, reach out to Danny, and certainly Daniel will book a time slot with the most appropriate person, whether it be himself or me or Steve or one of the guys in our team. But it's a great way to handle pre-sales questions if you guys are maybe you're a salesman and you have a customer that's interested in our product, or post-sales, you're a user or an applications engineer, needs to learn a little bit more about our functionality. It's a great way to do it. And it's all online and certainly socially distant. So that's good these days, right? But as I mentioned, Steve is going to be here, and he's certainly being socially distant with his mask right now. A lot of you that have come to these events in the past probably know Steve. He's done 2 already this past year. So Steve is a great resource from us, based in the West Coast, been in the industry a long time, has a wealth of knowledge, absolutely, especially from the service and application standpoint of the world. So thank you, Steve, for joining us. And Steve, we got your mic. Let's do a mic check real quick.
Okay, I'm here, Chris.
Perfect. So what we're going to do is, at this stage, this should be my last slide, and it is. So I'm going to stop sharing real quick, and we're going to transition to Steve, because Steve is going to drive the initial content for today, and then I will be supporting him. We'll leave that as a little teaser. So you are the presenter now, Steve, so I will leave it to you. And if you guys, again, if you guys have some questions, shoot them into the Q&A. And if it's appropriate, I'll throw them out now, or we will definitely do a Q&A block at the end of the segment. So with that being said, Steve, it's all yours.
Okay, thank you, Chris. I assume that you can see my screen okay?
No, we don't have it yet. Try to share.
Let's see, I did, let me reshare it, hold on. Screen number 1. Good thing I asked. Huh?
Yeah, good thing you asked. So we see your main desktop. Yep, there's your slides. Perfect.
Okay. Well, thank you, Chris. As Chris mentioned, I'm out here in California, still wearing a mask. However, not because of COVID, but because of the fires. I mean, it's really bad. I mean, tell me, Chris, the sun isn't really supposed to be orange in the middle of the day, is it?
I don't think so. It isn't out here.
Well, it is in California. So anyways, thanks again, Chris, for this opportunity to present this service and maintenance topic. And the primary topics that we'll discuss and demonstrate during today's webinar will be the navigation for troubleshooting and maintenance. We're going to tackle a little bit of the system hardware overview. We're going to talk about the backups and recoveries, the different types of backups that you can make, license and option management, and onboard tools and diagnostics. So there are really a lot of useful tools on the 840 and the 828 control for troubleshooting and diagnostics. And we're going to touch on some of those today. We're not going to have the opportunity to go in real deep in any one topic, but consider this maybe service and maintenance 101 part 1. So we'll hopefully have the opportunity to delve into these topics and more topics in greater detail as we move along with our series of webinars. And as Chris mentioned, at any time during the presentation, feel free to type in a question. And if we have the opportunity during the presentation, we may take those as we're moving along, or we may save them for the end of the presentation. So primarily we'll be discussing 2 different controls, the 828 and the 840. And most of what we'll be going over will apply equally to either control, but not everything is the same, especially when we start talking about some of the hardware on the 828 is a little different than the 840. So when it comes to the 840, we have two systems. The one that you see on the left, the solution line, is the current system, and the one on the right is known as the power line. And that's the solution line came out, I think it was about 10 years ago or so, if not more. And the solution line is the power line is the older unit, and it's important to know which unit you have if you call in with any questions to our hotline. That's probably one of the first things they'll want to know. So the principal difference in appearance, the power line is a whiter color as opposed to the gray color on the solution line. And most of the connections are right in the front of the panel. As you can see, you'll have ribbon cables and everything pretty much goes into the front, except for the motors, of course, plug into the bottom. On the solution line, there are no connections on the front of the panel. So. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about navigation for service, and navigation on the Siemens controls is really quite simple once you know a couple little tricks, and pretty much it all starts with this menu select key. So once you hit the menu select key, all the horizontal soft key it'll always return to the same set of horizontal and vertical soft keys. No matter how deep you are in screens, you could be 3, 4, maybe even 5 levels deep. And whenever you hit the menu select key, you will always return back to these horizontal soft keys and vertical soft keys. So that's an important way to kind of get back to the different modes that you may want to get into. So the horizontal soft keys will be displaying the different modes. And primarily today we'll be using this setup mode and the diagnostics mode. One thing where a lot of people get a little off track is they'll see the second horizontal soft key, which says parameter. So that's not the machine parameters, not to be confused with machine parameters. Those are actually a tool. That's where you get into see some tool data, things like tool and magazine data, offsets, user variables. Those types of things are accessed through the parameter key. So that's not where you get into the machine data, which other controls is known as the parameters. So not to get confused there. For each one of these horizontal soft keys, there is a hard key on the control to match. As we look off to the right side on this navigation pane, you'll see that there is a hard key for every one of those modes except for setup. There is no hard key for setup. The only way to get into setup is by pressing menu select. And the menu select key is not always located right where you see on the navigational pane. It could be anywhere on the user control panel. In fact, if it's a touch screen, there may not be a menu select key, but when you touch the upper right-hand corner of the screen, where right now we're looking at the alarm or the diagnostics icon, that's the same thing as pressing the menu select key. The other two keys here are, there's the previous screen, so that'll back you out to the screen that you were in previously, and you may have to hit that again 2 or 3 times to get back to the first screen. And then you have the extend key. So what that does is that extends this horizontal row of soft keys. One other important point to know when you're navigating through the Siemens control is once you change from one mode to the other, the control always goes back to the mode that you were in the last time that you were in that mode. So it always goes back to the screen that you were in the last time you were in that mode. Okay, here we're going to take a look at the map of the different keys that are available once you hit the setup key. Again, to get into the setup key, it's always the menu select, and then you hit the setup key. So the horizontal row of soft keys will change, and you'll have your choice to get into machine datas, which we'll get into it a little bit today, and different choices here. Optimize test is another one that we'll be getting into just a little bit. And then if you use this extend key right here, that's where you can get into make set up archives, set passwords, change passwords. And also that's where you get into take a look at the license screen on the control. From the diagnostics screen, again, menu select and then diagnostics, that's where you would go to take a look at the alarm lists, the current alarms in the control, the current messages, if you want to take a look at the alarm log. And then you also, this is where we'll go in to take a look at the version of the software in the system. So when we look, once we press one of these horizontal soft keys, and we'll see either the horizontal or the vertical soft keys will change to what you see below that particular screen. Okay, so when it comes to passwords and viewing what the current password is in the control, this is viewed by pressing menu select and then setup. And then the screen is going to look like the screen that you see here on the left. So the current access level is manufacturer, which is the highest level. And there are two lesser levels, evening and sunrise. From a user standpoint, it's best to set the password to customer. And then for service technicians and engineers, evening is that should allow them access to most of the functionality that they would be able to use. And sunrise is one that you'll have to be a little careful with, because that's where you can, if you don't know what you're doing, you can create some problems where the machine, actually you can take a running machine and make some changes and might not run when you're through with it. So that's another reason why we'll be discussing later archives and backups and things like that. So another thing that happens, I've received several phone calls on if someone doesn't know the password and they've tried the passwords that we see up above here, and they're not working. So that means that somebody went in there and changed the password, and maybe that person either forgot it or maybe they're no longer with the company. So you can set the default passwords back by just loading an NC data archive, and then that'll set the passwords back to the default values, which are what you see up above here. And then once you read in a current archive, then that'll return that machine back to running conditions. So I would start by making an archive before loading in a standard NC. Otherwise you could lose some valuable data as far as customer programs and things of that nature. Okay, before we transition over to Sinutrain, we're going to talk just a little bit about what we're going to do when we get there. So that the top one, the menu select, the setup to set the date and the time, I can't actually do that on Sinutrain because it uses the clock on the PC. So that's one that Chris is going to demonstrate for us when we get into the live demonstration of his machine and his virtual TAC. But what I can do is go into menu select, diagnostics. We'll take a look at the version in the control, and then from there we'll go into setup, and then we'll take a look at the license screen because there's important information in both of those screens. So from there, let's see here. Let me bring up Sinutrain real quick. Okay, is that all good, Chris? Can you see Sinutrain okay?
Yep, we got it. We got
all
it.
Right.
And
okay.
Dave responded back. He likes the hamburger key.
Oh, the hamburger
It's
key.
the hamburger key with an exclamation point. Yeah, that looks kind of like a
It kind
hamburger.
of looks like a hamburger, cheeseburger.
I would agree. I would
Yeah,
agree.
and then of course the menu select. If you take a closer look at that, that looks like a double hamburger.
There you go. Double quarter
Yeah,
pounder with cheese,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
My personal favorite.
Or as in California, we would like to call that a double from In-N-Out.
Yeah, but you probably
In-N-Out
put
burger.
sprouts on it out there. You put sprouts on
Avocado
everything.
sprouts, yeah, of course. Yeah, we
Right.
put those on our pizza as well, but
I know you do.
that's a topic for another day. Okay,
All
so
right.
here we're looking
You're
at
up.
the main screen in Sinotrain, and then when I hit menu select, this is what happens. So these horizontal soft keys will always look the same whenever I hit menu select, as well as these vertical soft keys. And again, there are hard keys over here that you can press, but there is no hard key for the setup key. So the only way that you can get into setup to do any of the functions available in setup is by hitting menu select. So we're going to start and go into setup, and from there, as you can see, our horizontal soft keys now changed. And if I was just to go into machine data, for example, here I see this up arrow. So that's where I would press that to get back to the main screen. We can see our current access level is manufacturer. If I wanted to reset the password, I would do that here. And also there's this ever important key for reset PO and reset power on, which we'll get into later on. But as I hit this right arrow key to cursor over, that's where I get into the license screen. From there, here I'm looking at the main screen in the license area, the control. And what's important to note here is the serial number of the CF card is listed in the top. Anytime that you wanted to add an option to the control, maybe you have a defective CF card and you want to replace it, you're going to need to know that CF card serial card number. That's also listed on the CF card itself, but you don't necessarily have to go into the back of the control and pop that out to look at it. That would be available right here, and also the machine serial number. And then here we're taking a look at the license key. So if you go to, say, all options, for example, and if you wanted to search for a specific option, you can always use the search key. And we would, let's say, for example, we wanted to look at for residual stock removal, go to OK, and then that's going to bring us right to, actually, let me see, let me go to the next one. Continue search. Let me see what happened. Try that again.
Yeah, you only put RES, so it's finding everything with RES.
Yeah, residual.
Yeah, there you go. So you do want to be as specific as you can with some of the search criteria, that's for sure. Because there's a lot of options.
I probably blew right past it. But anyways, the residual material detection and machining, I can see that is set. So that's a quick and easy way to see what's licensed with Sinotrain. Everything, you have access to all the different options, but certainly on the control, you will not have everything will not be licensed. But then it's just a matter of setting it and then activating it. So from there, we'll go back to menu select, go to diagnostics, and here we'll take a look. These are the different alarms, whether the current alarms in the control, the list, the current messages, the alarm log, if you wanted to create a log or view the log that's in the control. But we're going to go to version, and we're going to take a look at the version in the controls. You can see it's updating. It's checking the actual version as and comparing it to the target version. So the actual version in the control is Sinumerik Operate, and here we have version 4.8, Service Pack 2, and no hotfix. And we can see that the target and the actual version matches. And we can go and look in greater detail, but for now, I think that's sufficient. That's important information if you have a problem problem with the control, that's probably the first question you'll get from the folks on the hotline is, what's your version of software on the control? So that's the quick and easy way to find that out. So from there, we're going to transition back to my slide deck. All right. Now we're going to take a little bit of a look at the hardware overview and compare the 840 to the 828. So a lot of the hardware is the same. Certainly when you get down to the bottom and you look at the motor modules and the line modules, they're pretty much the same. On the 840, if you look at the top of the screen, that's where we're looking at the TCU, and that's called the thin client unit, and that serves mostly as the interface to the HMI. It has no data storage or LED displays for diagnostics, so it's just basically the front panel and everything that would connect into that. Now it's possible on the 840 that it's not shown here, but you also could have what's called a PCU or an IPC. So that's another computer that's used for either connecting to the outside world, running Windows types applications, or you can actually run the control through that too. So some controls will have a TCU and a PCU. Some might have just a PCU. The PCU, but most of them will have the TCU as shown here. And with the 840, everything really connects down at the bottom to the NCU. That's the numerical control unit. And as we can see that everything is kind of connected through this central unit, whether it be the system network, the factory network, the different motor modules, line modules, they're all connected to the NCU. And if we look at the 828, we don't see a TCU, and there is no NCU here either. So everything connects into the back of the PPU. So no NCU or TCU on the 828. If we take a look at the back of the 828 and everything that's connected to the back end, we'll see that we have our Ethernet connections for drive click and motor and line modules, Profinet interface. You also have the connections for the I/O right on the back of that, and the incoming power on the left side. And you do have some LEDs that will display the status of those Ethernet ports. When you look at the front of the screen, the front of the PPU, you'll see the user interface, and underneath the cover on the left side as well, you'll see a CF card that is used for transferring programs and storing programs. It's not the CF card that's used for which holds the actual system software. There's also a USB stick that you can use for transferring or even running programs, although you have to be careful if you're going to run programs from the USB stick, because sometimes they're not the highest quality. They could be bumped out, bumped and removed in the middle of the process, and that might not be a good thing. But you also do have these three LEDs. You have the ready LED, and if that's green, that means that the system is ready. You have the NC, and if that's orange, that means you have a healthy system. If it's red, that's not so good. Same thing with the ready light. If that's red or orange, it could just be as it's booting up, the status of it. But when it's through booting, you want that to be green. You want the NC to be orange, and then the other LED is just for telling you the access for the CF card. Okay, so now we're going to take a closer look at the NCU. So on the left side, we're looking at a photograph of the NCU, and in the middle, we're looking at where everything is connected into the NCU. Again, the NCU is on the 840 only, not on the 828. So you have the drive click interfaces on the top that's going to connect to the rest of the components in the system, the motor modules, the line modules, and and those types of things. Below that, you have some digital I/O that you have access to, and it is possible to connect some I/O directly into the NCU without having to go into the PLC. And then you have your Ethernet connections, and then a USB port, and another X130 for a factory network. But down at the bottom, we're going to take a closer look at that in the next slide. But that's really where a lot of the important diagnostic tools, as far as the NCU is concerned, are available. It's also where the CF card is stored. And the NCU really is the heart and the brains of the entire system. Pretty much everything goes through it, whether it be the PLC, the drives, the NCK, which is the numerical control kernel, or the actual system, the internal system itself, the software, and then the internal HMI goes through there, and then all the communications protocols, whether it be the X120, which is the internal Ethernet, X130 for an external like factory network, and X127 is located at the bottom of the NCU, and that's the service network. Okay, quick look at the bottom of the NCU, because there's some important diagnostic information here. First of all, on the left side, we can see the CF card, right? That's not for user programs, but that's where the system data is stored. Parameters, programs are also stored there, and as well as the licenses that we spoke about in one of the earlier slides. They're also all stored on that CF card. So that's a very important CF card, and it's not you just don't go to Best Buy and buy that CF card again, because it has all the licenses. It's specially formatted. The operating system is Linux on it, so that's where that's located. And if we look to the right side, we'll see these rotary selector switches, and those are important if you ever have to do a system reset, whether it be the NCK, the kernel, or the PLC. That's where that's located. And in fact, when you're restoring archives, it's important to select put the selector switch for the PLC in the stop mode. Otherwise, you might run into some problems when you're restoring an archive. Okay, also on the bottom of the NCU, there's some diagnostic LEDs on the right side. So if you're having trouble booting, if the system's not operating correctly, if it's a little funky, that's usually the first place that you'll look. Right after you look at the error messages on the screen, what the controller is telling you. This will give you a little deeper on what's happening in the boot up process and whether the control is ready to run or not. So depending on the color of these lights, it's going to give you certain status information. For example, the ready light, if that's red, there's at least one fault. It'll go through a series of orange and red when it's booting, and depending where it gets hung up on, that may give you an indication of where the problem is. If it's green, that's good. That means that the NC is good to go. And the next light after that is the run light, and that's for the status of the PLC. If it's in green, that's in run mode. Then we have other LEDs below that with a definition for each one. So again, important information, as well as the 7-segment LED display below that is going to, through the boot up process, is going to give you different numbers. But basically, when that's a 6 with a flashing decimal point, that means the system is good to go. This is also where the X127, which is the service network, easiest place to connect into the control for the service technician, and has a fixed IP and DHCP protocol. So basically, set your computer to automatically detect the IP, and you should be good to go. All right. Okay, and of course, it's also important not to overlook the battery and the fan that's on the back of the NCU on the 840, because all batteries and fans, they have a limited life, right? And it's about 2 years. You may get more out of it, but you're basically on borrowed time. So as a standard preventative maintenance measure, it's very important not to overlook the importance of changing the battery and the fan. And you'll get certain messages that will be displayed on the control when the battery drops below a certain voltage, in this case 2.7 to 2.9 volts. You'll get a warning that the battery threshold is reached. At that point, you have 6 weeks to change that battery. If the voltage drops below 2.6 volts, even before that 6 weeks is up, you'll get another battery alarm. And in that case, it's probably too late. You're probably going to lose some important data, will either be lost or corrupted. So important to change that, and as well as the fan. This is available as one module, or you can change them independently, but I recommend changing them both at the same time, because if the fault goes off or the fan fault light goes on, you run into, it'll shut the system down to prevent it from overheating. And you'll also get, in addition to a message, you'll get the red SF card. That's at the bottom of the NCU that we were looking at earlier. That's where that's located. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about archives here before we transition over to Chris, and he's going to do a live demonstration on his machine, where he's going to create an archive and a few other things. So it's important to note before you begin that these procedures that we'll be going over for archiving and reloading are generic, and depending on your OEM, they may have more specific procedures. So it's always a good idea to kind of check with them, especially when it comes to reloading an archive. And if possible, it's recommended to make a temporary archive of the machine. So if the control boots up, then it's possible to make an archive. If it's not booting, then you're not going to be able to make an archive, and you're going to have to rely on some of the existing archives that hopefully are in the machine. And before you make an archive, it's always best to return the tools to the magazine by activating a tool 0. And the reason for that is if you leave a tool in the spindle and you make an archive and somebody loads that archive back into the machine at a later time, and that same tool is not in the spindle, well, guess what? That could be a serious problem. So always put the tools back to into the magazine, and it's also not a bad idea to return the machine to return all access to machine home as well. And then after you restore the archive, of course, you take a look at the tools in the magazine and verify that they are in fact correct. Now, when it comes to reloading an archive, if the PLC selector switch, again, that's what we were looking at on the bottom of the NCU, if that's in position 1, then that may inhibit the loading of the PLC or the archive. So it's best to put the PLC in stop mode. That's where you use that rotary selector switch and put it in position 2 before loading the archive. And last but not least, don't forget about the Siemens hotline assistance. If you get hung up or need more information, it's a good resource. Okay, so we will transition to Chris in just a minute, but before we do that, we're going to talk about how to get into the archive, which we'll be demonstrating, and the different types of backups that we have. Even though when you create an archive and you may be creating what's called a complete setup archive, it's really not 100% complete in the sense that it doesn't back up the system, which is stored on the CF card, and it doesn't it's not a clone. It's just, it has important information. It's easy to make and easy to back up, but it's not an entire backup of the whole system. But it is necessary to have a setup archive, if you're going to go through and make any changes into the machine data or the system parameters, if you're not sure what those the effect of those are, then you should have a backup. If you're going to make more than one or two changes, it's a really good idea to have a backup. That's your, think of that as your get out of jail free card. Right. Oftentimes that's all that's needed to get the machine back into running condition. But other cases where you might need a setup archive, certainly when OEMs are building machines, they'll use a series machine production archive. If you're going to exchange certain types of hardware, like say the TCU on an 840 or the PCU, a hard disk drive, the NCU or the CF card, all those will require a setup archive. So don't go changing those unless you have created an archive. And there are different types of backups that we have other than the standard archives. One is the TGZ file, and that's a clone of the CF card. So that's what has the system software, which is Linux-based. That's where that's stored. And if you have a PCU50 or what's called an IPC, which is an industrial personal computer, which is essentially the same thing as a PCU50, you're going to want to make a backup of that using like Norton Ghost or some similar type of backup software. Simplest way to make an archive is stick a USB stick into the control, and on the 840 you do a Control-Alt-S, and then it'll automatically make a complete archive. You won't be able to rename it or make individual archives, but it's easy. It might take a little while depending on the amount of cycles that are in the control, builder cycles and those types of things. So make sure you have a stick with a sufficient amount of memory. And in the 840, it's just Control-Alt-C in order to make that archive. So with that, Chris, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and then give you access, and we'll go to the live part of our demonstration.
Perfect. So I'm going to switch over here. We're going to show you how to actually make an archive on a real machine. In the past, when we've done these different events, we've always been limited to Sinutrain, so some of that stuff we haven't been able to show. So hopefully it's not too laggy. Looks like it's jumping around a little bit. Let me just, you seeing it jerking around there from you, Steve?
It looks pretty good. You're a little herky-jerky, but
let me just try to stop and reshare really quick, and if not, we'll just have to deal with it. But I see it doesn't look as smooth as it was. You know, these day and age with the kids at home and everybody's using a bandwidth, it is becoming more and more challenging. So let's do this one more time. And yeah, still a little jerky. That's not great, but that's okay. We'll still be able to see it. So as you guys are getting a little bit of a back office kind of view of the VTAC. So this is my baby, my little CM20 milling machine here. And actually the software you're seeing, that's actually the software we use to produce the live events. So we are going to come on in and fire up the machine. I'm going to give you a nice close-up shot of the screen here. And one of the first things Steve did mention was date and time. That is a very important scenario that you would want to always make sure is accurate on your machine. Very easy to adjust the date and time, as Steve's been telling you. You want to look for that menu select key. Mine's just down below you because I'm zoomed into the screen, but now you see the setup. So when you go to setup, there's a portion of the setup buttons called HMI, Human Machine Interface. So generally things that are going to change the appearance of the screen could be found under HMI. This is where you go to network drives and do a couple other things, but this is also where you'll see the vertical soft key for date and time. So you do want to come in, you want to set your date and time here. Extremely important when you're first installing a machine, because you are going to make a XML file when you register the machine, which is actually a bill of materials off the machine, and your warranty will base off of the timestamp in that file, and that timestamp is part of the date and time. Okay, so the next step that we're going to want to do is we're going to want to do an archive, and I'm going to show you the long way to do an archive. I would certainly suggest this is probably more appropriate for those service technicians out there. If you're just an operator, or if you're a maintenance guy and you want to do a PM process of the archive, you probably don't need to go to that full extent. As Steve said, do a Control-Alt-S, and that will give you a system archive. Now, 828 or 840 doesn't matter. You can always use a Control-Alt-S. However, it will be a little different on 828. You're going to see this. The 828s create an ARD file. 840s create an ARC. From your side, it really shouldn't make much of a difference. But if you're going to load it into the control on an 828, it has to be the ARD. So the Control-Alt-S will do both of those. The Control-Alt-C that Steve mentioned, we can talk about that a little later too. That's if you want to build a Sinutrain machine. So we can get back to that. But when building an actual archive, and let me zoom in again. As we said before, menu select and setup. It's going to return you to the screen I was in. Now, if I look at my horizontal keys, I don't physically see the archive button. I need to expand over. So I'm using the gray key right here in the lower right-hand corner of my screen. If I had a touch screen, I could also touch that little indicator right there. That would do the same thing. We go to Setup Archive, and there's two things that this area does. It lets me create an archive, or this is where I would go to read in an archive I've built. So we're going to create an archive, and now you're going to get a sub-selection screen. So back in the day, everybody used to make separate archives for each of these pieces of components. Since we came out with Operate, we've been kind of preaching all along to just go in and make it with one complete archive, because you can then check or uncheck when you read in each component. So you're not limited to how you're going to load in the archive just because you built it with everything. So here I could come and you can see, I could say, do I want the NC data? That's all my machine parameters. Do I want the PLC project? Do I want my drives? If you do want your drives, what format do you want it in? I always put it in an ASCII format. This way it's fully readable. I don't personally know any benefit to binary. Maybe Steve, if you know, might be a little smaller, but I don't think there is. And then you have the HMI data. So that's probably one of the few things I will usually unselect. If I want to make sure I capture all of the custom screens in my machine, then you're going to want to have the HMI button selected, but it will make a very heavy archive. There'll be a lot of data in it. If I'm just grabbing something because I'm doing a memory reorder, which is a pretty common process in our world, then I might just grab an NC by itself. You can put comments. You can say who created it, say okay, and now you can tell it where you want to create the archive. So you can put it on its own internal memory, or I can write it right to a USB stick if I have one loaded in the machine. You can browse to a subfolder or whatnot. So I'm just going to put in the root of my USB. Then I can give it some name. So I could call it, the machine serial number, and I could say NCDRV PLC. Just kind of tells me what's in that archive. DRV PLC. Sometimes I'll put all. I am a big advocate of the date, so I put a little date code here. What's today? To the 10th? I think it's the 10th. If it's not, it's going to be the 10th for now. Okay, well, it's the 10th for now. Fill out the name. I don't have to put any extension here. Say okay. And now it's going to start building this. And this process can take a minute or so. Depends on, obviously, if I'm doing HMI and there's a lot of heavy custom screens. I don't think I have much of any custom screens in this machine build, so that's usually not a big deal. If there's a lot of custom cycles, some of our builders do make quite a bit of customized cycles. Now, what I will suggest to you while this is loading, if you're going to use the Control-Alt-S, you want to be careful because that's just automatically going to dump an archive to the USB stick. So what happens a lot of times is when you go to build it, you may not know where it actually put that. And I run into this problem all the time on the DMGs because the DMG Mori has a little key fob plugged in, and it's actually a USB key fob and can be used as a USB stick. And it'll dump it to there, and then you're looking all over for your Control-Alt-S archive, and it's sitting on the USB key fob. So just keep that in mind. And then once you're all said and done, you'll see archive has been successfully completed. Now I have an archive. If I come all the way back, and maybe I look at my USB stick, I have my USB archive with the name. If I want to load in the archive, there's a bunch of different ways to do it. One of the easiest ways is just to go attempt to open it. And this is where you can see I can then check or uncheck the components that I built. Obviously, I need to at least have one. Say OK, and it's going to completely rebuild the system. But you want to be careful, and our archive is actually no good. And it's no good because I had a tool in my spindle. So that's always a no-no. You always want to make sure that you come up to the machine first, do a full spindle clear with just a simple T0, get that tool out of the spindle, and then build your archive. And with that being said, I'm going to switch it back to you, Steve, unless you think there's something else we need to go through.
No, I think that you covered it quite well. We'll have an opportunity to get back at you later on. So,
absolutely.
At this point, I'm not able to share my content or share my screen.
Oops, sorry, the bubble went to the wrong spot. Let me do it again. There you go. You should have it.
There we go. Screen one. Okay, all good. I think everybody can see my screen at this point.
We are good. Sorry, I just muted myself.
All right. Okay, thanks again for that very important demonstration, Chris. So the next area we're going to look at are the access and drive diagnostics. And this is a critical area to know how to get to and how to look at certain types of signals. And you get there by hitting menu select, then you diagnostics, and then you use the right arrow key to extend that horizontal row of soft keys, and then you go into access diagnostics. And you're going to see a screen that looks like what we see at the bottom left-hand side. And depending on if the drives are on or if there's any faults, the screen's going to look a little differently. But generally, when you see all green, that's a good thing. There are some exceptions. There are some signals that could be missing or low, as it's kind of explaining here on the right side. If the signal is missing or low, that's going to be yellow. If it's green, that's a healthy signal. If it's red, that's indicating a fault. In this case, we're looking at a temperature fault, because the motor temperature is creating a fault. In this case, it was because an encoder was not connected to the drive. So that's an indicator of what's going on. You can actually go a lot deeper into these screens to tell you more about the actual faults, but this is a great place to start. And signals that aren't being used will be depicted by this icon here down at the bottom. So from there, we're going to the next screen in Access Diagnostics, before we again transition back to Chris in his tack, is the service access. This is a vertical soft key, and this gets you into a screen where you can look at all kinds of information, including the following error, which is a real important thing to know when you're getting a fault on the machine and you think it may be mechanical or you think something's out of alignment. The following error is a good thing to look at there, and Chris will actually give us a quick demonstration of how to get in there and look at that. But it's very important when you get into the screen that you are looking at the right axis, the correct axis. So that's shown up in the right-hand corner, upper right-hand corner of that screen. So if you're looking at the y-axis, if you're moving the y-axis, you got to make sure you have the select axis, the correct axis selected. Okay, so with that, Chris, I'm going to stop sharing and take it away.
All right, so let's switch back over to our machine here, because this certainly gives us a chance to really kind of see what's going on there. So let me go back to our quick share. All right, so everybody should have the screen right now on your machine. Now, in this case, I e-stopped the machine as you were talking, so I'm going to show you a little bit about how that behavior looks. Now, what we want to do is we want to go to find our diagnostic screen. Now, sometimes it gets a little confusing. You look at a hard button, and just to show you real quick, oops, sorry, switching screens. When I look at the hard button, it says alarm down here, yet I see diagnostics. So we haven't always been consistent about our terminology. If the icon is exactly the same, it means it's going to go to the same place. So I want to get into the diagnostics area. We'll zoom in for you here. And then I'm going to use that expand over key to look for the Access Diagnostics button. Once I come into Access Diagnostics, the base screen is going to be that first screen that Steve showed to you. And this is an indicator of what the state, basically the control, specifically the motors and drives, are in. So as you start to turn your machine on, power it up, and go through your energizing process, and then the system turns on, you're going to start to hopefully see these different check marks you're going to get. Now, if you don't have a check mark on a given access, that could be a problem, or it might just be part of, you know, the way the machine's currently enabled at this stage, right? Now, first thing, I look across the top and I see AX1 through AX5. Probably have no idea what that means to me. So each one of those is an axis, but how do we know which is X, Y, Z? You would be totally guessing if you assumed that AX1 is X. A lot of time it is, but doesn't mean it is. So a quick way to figure out your axis names is if you go to your machine parameters. So we're going to go back to setup. We're going to go to machine data. We're going to go to axis MD. And then we're going to look at the top, and we can toggle between them. So it says AX1, just to the right of that, it's going to say MX, and that X is going to start to change. So that's telling us axis 1 is X. If I hit the plus key, now MY1, so axis 2 is Y, then Z, and the big 2 that I needed to know is axis 4 is my machine spindle, axis 5 is my A axis. So if I go back to diagnostics, where we were in Access Diagnostics, my A axis, which is axis 5, well, I don't have it bolted on the machine right now. So if you look here, you notice my A axis would typically be in this screen, that area. That is not physically loaded on the machine. So that is why I have no enables for that axis. Now my spindle happens to be sitting, it's on, but it's not held in an enable. So that would allow me, if I was showing it to you real quick, I can free spin that spindle, right? So here I can spin this physical spindle right now. So a lot of builders will do that. And then what they'll do is as you command the spindle to move, it'll pull in its enables. So see how everything went now green basically on that? And if I stop it, they may drop the enable, or mine is physically holding my enable until I hit reset, and then it's going to drop out. So this really gives you a good idea. So it's good to get familiar with how your machine is operating in a normal state. So if there is a problem, you can see. Now the bottom one, you see that all of these are yellow. So that's my measuring systems. So we can support up to 2 measuring systems in the control. This would be specific if I had a set of scales on my machine, which I don't. I just have rotary encoders. So that's why you don't see anything along the bottom. But if I had scales, that would tell me whether or not they were active. Now, the secondary screen that Steve mentioned is the service axis. So when I'm in this area, the vertical soft key to service axis, this is going to tell me a whole bunch of stuff. And it's important now to look again at your whichever axis you're displaying. So we're displaying the A, which isn't going to mean anything to me, but I can back up to, let's say, X. And now if I scroll all the way to the top, I'll see my following area. You can see motor temperature in here. There's a bunch of different things, load to the current state. But the following area is a great baseline to get. So as I move the machine around, you're going to see some number. Now, it's hard to tell you without going through a lot of sophistication as to whether or not that number is appropriate for the desired speed you're going. You will notice your following error changes based on the rate of speed. So I'm just cranking my override up or down, and then that following error is changing, if you guys can see that. So the big thing I would say, big takeaway, if you're going to use following error as kind of a benchmark from a preventative maintenance perspective, you want to find out what your nominal following error is at a set feed rate. So this way, over time, you can monitor it. Now, the big thing, too, is the following error, certainly between the axes, and let me go to Y, certainly between the axes that would interpolate, in this case, X or Y, at a given feed should always match. And if they don't match, that would be why you are milling egg-shaped circles. So there's some lag there, but if you walk into a machine from a service perspective, and it had been matching and now something dramatically changed, if you see a big difference in those following errors between those two axes, that's problematic, and then you would have to address that. And it may be something as basic as the conditions of machining changed. Maybe you got a huge heavy fixture on the table, and that's adding all kinds of load to the axis, inducing higher following error. Or maybe, like Steve said, you have a mechanical issue, you have a bearing going south, you have something binding. You don't know exactly what's happening, and it could be a motor failure, but generally speaking, more times than not, if you start to see following error spiking, it typically would be a mechanical problem. So with that being said, did I miss anything, Steve?
No, I think that was a pretty good overview. I would like to point out that on other control manufacturers will refer to following error as a lag. It's exactly the same thing, and that really is nothing more than that's in a perfect world, in a perfect machine, which there is no such thing. The actual position of the machine is going to be a little bit behind where it is supposed to be, and that's the following error or lag. So
Perfect.
It's same
I'm
thing.
going to switch back to you here, and then you can get moving along. Boom. All right, you got the bubble?
I got it.
You got it. You're ready.
Okay, so from there, we're just going to talk a little bit on alarms. Certainly, we could probably, on some of these topics, probably most of them, we could do the entire webinar just on these topics. But we're really just trying to provide a nice overview of some, not all of the key topics. So when you get to the alarm screen, which you can use by you can get to by hitting menu select and then diagnostics, or just hitting the alarm key itself. But that's where you'll take a look at the alarm list, and we're going to talk a little bit about what to do to clear certain alarms. And of course, don't overlook the help key, because when you're in a lot of different modes in the control, whether it be programming or you're in the setup mode looking at machine data, or you're in the diagnostic screen looking at alarms, pressing that help key is going to give you a context sensitive help guide that's going to point to different areas to look at if you're getting certain types of alarms or whatever's going on, depending on what you're doing. Don't overlook the importance of that feature in our control, because it is quite useful. Okay, so when we talk about alarms, there's if you look at the upper right-hand corner here, it's first, what you'll see is the alarm number, and then if you see an arrow there, that indicates that there's more than one alarm present. And then you'll get a brief description of the alarm, but it also will show you the acknowledgement method. So that's what you have to, the key that you have to press to clear that alarm once you've corrected whatever it was that caused it. So again, to get into alarms, menu select. It's not menu select, it's diagnostics. This down here is actually telling us how we can change the rotation cycle for different alarms. So if we have, there could be 10 or 15 alarms that are being displayed, and we might want to change how quickly they rotate and different functionality there. But on the left side of the screen, we'll see the different acknowledgement methods. So if you see this icon here, the very top one, then that's just going to require a cycle start to clear it. It also can be cleared by hitting the reset key, but oftentimes the operator just hits cycle start, and that particular alarm would go away. And then if you see this this icon here, that's going to require a reset PO or a reset power on. So that's kind of like a warm boot, almost like a Control Alt Delete on a PC. So you would get in there by hitting setup, and then hit the reset PO. And in some cases, it may become necessary to physically turn the power off on the machine and then reboot, which is a lengthier process, but depending on how the builder set up the clearing method for that alarm, that may be required. So if the reset PO doesn't do it, then by all means, go ahead and kill the power on the machine. Then we have the reset icon or the reset key. And once we press that, that will clear any alarm that denotes that. And then we have our hamburger key or the alarm cancel. And the only difference really between the alarm cancel button and the reset is alarm cancel does not reset the program. In other words, the program does not return back to the start of the program. It keeps you at that point in the program. And the other two less common types of alarms would be an HMI alarm, which you would clear by hitting diagnostics and then delete HMI alarm. And then the PLC alarm button may or may not be present depending on the builder, but certainly rebooting the system would clear any type of PLC alarms. And again, when you get to the alarm screen, that's where you'll see the alarm list, the current alarms in the control, the messages, which are the current messages displayed in the control, and then the alarm log, which will obviously keep track of all the alarms up to a certain predetermined number by a parameter that have occurred since that control was last rebooted. So with that, next slide. Okay, so now we're going to transition to Chris in just a minute, and he's going to do a live machine demo of what we call the circle test. And the circle test is an extremely useful tool in the control that is going to give you it's a ball bar type test, and really it's just as good as a ball bar. In some cases it's better, especially if you have linear scales on the machine in addition to rotary encoders, so you have two feedback systems. So we're looking at on the left side just an example of a control or a machine where the X and Y axis are not matched to each other. They're just this system has not been properly tuned, as opposed to what we see on the right side, which would be a pretty good looking circle. So with that, Chris, we're going to transition back to you and your virtual TAC.
Perfect. All right, let me just flip us back here. We'll be there in a second. All right. Okay, so we should, yep, oh, there's my hand. Okay, so we're going to do a circularity check, and as Steve mentioned, it is certainly a great way to validate what your machine is performing like. One of the nice parts I like about it, Steve mentioned sometimes it could even be better than a ball bar, is you can do it with a workpiece set up on your table. So if I want to see the behavior of maybe a part or a fixture has on my machine and how well it's going to interpolate, maybe I have a couple thousand pounds on my table, well, you can do that. Good luck trying to get a ball bar mounted on that machine with obviously a workpiece and a fixture and everything that comes into play there. So to get to the circularity test, what I need to do is I need to get over to my menu select and setup key. Now, if I was left in, remember, it's going to always go back to whatever screen I was last in there. So I'm one level up. I'm in machine parameters. So we're going to back out of machine parameters with that left arrow button. And I'm looking for the button called Optimize Test. And I would say before you make any changes on a control, you would want to take a look to see how this machine is responding. Under Optimize Test, you're going to see there's a horizontal soft key called Circularity Test. Now, unfortunately, with my machine, I don't have linear scales, just rotary encoders, as we mentioned. So I'm only going to see the behavior of what's happening at the motor. So potentially, I'm going to see jumps or what we call reversal spikes that aren't actually affecting how well my machine interpolates, but it's what's being compensated for. So we're going to see that in a sec. Best case scenario, if you have both rotary encoders and linear scales, you always have a rotary encoder, but if you have a linear scale, then I would want to look at the feedback of that scale. Now, what you're going to do is you're going to roughly position your table in the center of travel, specific to the axes that I'm going to be testing. In here, and let's get a little close up so you can really see the screen, I'm now going to choose my axes, right? So here I can pick from all my different axes. Now, certainly you're going to have two different axes. It's impossible to make a circle with just one axis, so you are going to have to choose two, but I can do an XY, I could do an XZ or a YZ to see how it's interpolating between those axes. From there, I'm just going to kind of fill out the rest of the screen. So I want to, it's going to use whatever unit or measure the machine is currently sitting in. I want to define a radius. So in this case, I'm doing a 2-inch radius. Certainly my radius has to work within the travel of my machine. Obviously, the bigger the radius I put in, the more it's going to kind of show that entire interpolation circle. So you don't want to make too small a radius. But at times, I've actually duplicated the exact part to see, you know, to mimic the conditions maybe of a cut condition. In this case, I'm going to use a 2-inch radius. I'm going to define the feed rate at which the machine is going to be moving. So certainly, the faster I run my machine, the more potential error I can have. I might see a little more friction as far as reversal. So if I'm looking to, you know, really get a real good representation of my circle, I'm going to want to go to lower feed rate, just as if I was machining the part, I would expect to get a better quality circle at a slower feed rate than a faster. But as you change it, right, so let's say I said 500 inches per minute, you see this measuring time will change. So what's happening is really kind of a behavior between the feed rate and this multiplier can change this measuring time. And the measuring time is basically just how much time we're giving it to record the circle. So in the older versions, you kind of had to play with this a little bit because you had to make sure that you are reading long enough for it to get all the way around the circle. Then the last thing I want to do is I want to define my graduations for my scale. So here I'm going to do a 1/10 of an inch, 0.0001. So every line, when I show that little scale, I'm going to see that. And then what do I want to display? The average radius or my program radius. So if I'm getting an imposition problem where maybe the thing's cutting a round circle, but it's not dimensionally this size, I could use the program radius. If I just really want to get an idea of what the circle looks like, I could just do the mean average radius. Now, version 4.7 software, you guys know how to get that now because Steve showed you. And newer gives you this generate circle program, and that's real handy. Prior to that, 4.5 or older, you had to have your own little program running, and then it created a circle program automatically, and then you could just run the test. You could just say start recording. In this case, by hitting generate circle program, I do have to put the machine into auto mode, and we can back up here so you can see what it's going to look like. I'm just going to hit cycle start. I'm not going to auto. I'm doing it solely from within this screen, but you see the machine just starts moving. Don't worry, this will just keep moving indefinitely. And then you hit start at any time you want once it's starting the circle, and it's going to begin to acquire or gather the data. So you can see we get this little indicator. I'll zoom in for you so you can really see it. Once that comes back, looked kind of uneventful, but it just recorded all the information you need. It says the circularity test completed. So now hit your graph, and you're going to see what the circle looks like. So in our case, it might be hard for you guys to see, but I'm getting a reversal spike in the X and the Y. But remember, I'm looking at the motor. So in this case, I'm seeing as I change direction of my motor, it's spiking up to 0.3 of an inch because each of these lines is 1/10 in the X. And then when I look, I'm going to get 0.2 of reversal spike in my Y. So what is that? Well, specifically, that would be my machine backlash because we are looking at the motor encoder. So if I was to go, back to setup, I just got to bounce out of the screen, go to machine data, go to axis. I want to look maybe at my X-axis first. I'm going to do a quick search if I don't know what the parameter is. So I'm going to put backlash, comes down and finds the backlash parameter. And now I see, okay, this machine, when they built it, they had basically 0.3 worth of backlash in it. It's Not uncommon at all. Actually, that's pretty damn good if you ask me, but this is a linear round machine, so there's not a lot of resistance there. And then if I go to my y-axis, I see my 2/10. So had I zeroed that out and reran it, then I would surely see what's happening at the motor without any additional compensation. But what I also see from that test, we'll go back to it real quick, is, and what's nice is it does store the graph until I rerun again. I can also get a good example. Let's go to a full screen of how round my circle would be. So I'm getting a little bit of variance, but again, remember, one line is a tenth. So if I'm getting a tenth of variance as it's rolling around those edges, a lot. So she's certainly well synchronized machine between the X and the Y axes. So with that, Steve, is there something I'm missing, or do we get everything?
No, I think you covered it pretty well. I would like to just point out that you can hit the save key as well, so you can save that that graph and then put it as part of your PM report, so you know exactly how the machine was reacting at that particular time. So you can save and then reload those graphic representations of the circle. So
absolutely.
So,
and actually, it's a real handy tool. I mean, I've been on service cases where we were having interpolation issues physically on a part. So I cut a part, I plotted the interpolation, I saved it. We took the part over to a CMM, a Zeiss CMM, and they CMM'd it. And it was amazing how, I mean, they were identical. From what we were seeing off the scales to what we were seeing. And then at the end of the day, we had to obviously do some little bit of tweaking and tuning, some friction comp scenarios and whatnot.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's exactly right. I've also done testing and compared these results from the control to a ball bar, and identical results. I mean, it's really a useful tool, and like Chris said, easier to set up, and it's a very important tool to use to see exactly what the machine is doing dynamically. So thanks again for that, Chris.
Absolutely.
And,
you should be able to share now.
Yeah, I should be able to share. And here we go. Got it?
No, not yet. Try it again.
Let's see, share screen one.
Oh, okay. Now it's coming up.
Okay.
I think we're a little laggy today on our bandwidth.
It is Friday, right? Friday afternoon, so everything kind of slows down on Friday. So the last topic that we're going to touch on, because we are running a few minutes behind schedule here, but not so bad, but is the machine and setting data, right? So once you get to those screens, which we'll demonstrate on Sinotrain in just a few moments here. But if you hit menu select, setup, and then machine data, then you have your choice to come up into all these different machine data and setting data areas, and then you can also apply some filters, so you're not looking at thousands and thousands of parameters. You can set filters to just look at maybe some axis drive parameters or PLC datas and those types of things. So let me move to the next screen here. And once you get into the machine and setting data, you'll see that there are different ways to activate once you make a change in the parameter. And again, there's that help key, so don't be shy. That's really a helpful tool on board our control. So in order to activate certain parameters, depending on what machine data you're trying to activate, the acknowledgement activation method is different. The key press. So you have PO for, in which case you'll have to hit the reset PO key, and that'll activate those parameters. CF card or I'm not CF card, but activate MD active is the key that you have to press to activate if that's has the CF displayed at the end of the parameter. And then the reset key would reset any parameter that has the RE at the end of it. And those parameters are activated immediately after pressing the input key. So with that, I'm going to transition back to Sinumerik one last time, and we'll take a look at some of the machine data. So as I mentioned earlier, remember the control always comes back to the mode that you were in last, or the screen that you were in last when you were in that mode. So in this case, if I go to setup, and I happen to be in the license screen because that's where I was last. So to get back, in this case, I will hit the right arrow key, and to get to look at machine data. And here we're looking at general machine data. So this is all the machine data that are relevant for the entire machine. You have channel data, which would be specific to that channel on a single channel machine, is just say a standard 3 or 4 axis machine. Generally just going to have one channel. Axis MD, so those are your axis parameters. And then you do have to pay attention to what it's telling you at the very top, as Chris had pointed out in his earlier demonstration. You can also set up user views where you can really optimize the view if it's maybe 5 parameters, 10 parameters, or 20 parameters that you're going in and changing. You don't have to go through all the different areas of the parameters. You can just highlight the ones that you want to change. Then you can always just go back to this customized user view. We'll take a look in the under axis. We can see that this is the value, right? In this case, it's just showing us whether it be inch, degrees, or maybe it's a hexadecimal value. And then you have the activation method here. So this is that PO. This is the key, the reset PO, which is going to activate the parameter. And then you have the reset key. And if there are any in here for CF, that's where you would press the set MD active parameter. So in addition to these parameters, you also have what's called setting data parameters. And those are generally going to be parameters that are maybe the end user, the operator might want to change for the operation of the machine, whether it be increment like distance for jogging the machine, all kinds of different values. So you do have these setting data, and then you have display MD, and those where you can set the way that the display is looking, maybe what the timeout is before it goes into sleep mode, maybe how long you're going to show that little tooltip that pops up when you're writing a program. You have an animation delay in a lot of our cycles, user cycles. There's the animation involved, and that comes in this case after 10 seconds. But one quick point on the machine data. In order to find something, we get back to where I was, cursor over. Let's say if I wanted to find, Chris was looking at backlash. If I do a search and I type in backlash, right, and hit OK. Okay, it is right now it's telling me it didn't find it. That's because I'm in general machine data. If I just hit cancel, I take a look in channel, see if it's in there, do the search again, it pops up. No, it's not in there either. Cancel that, and then let's go to Access MD, which is where we should find it. And there we have our backlash parameters that Chris was looking at. So even though there are literally thousands and thousands of parameters in there, you certainly don't have to thumb through them to find what you're looking for, but always be real careful to look at which axis, because right now we're just looking at the X. If we wanted to look at a different axis, then this is actually this set up for 30 different axes. So you can select different axes directly this way too. Okay. Let me transition back to.
And one thing to note while you're transitioning, the search will find anything in the variable name, right? That's that description name to the MD number. It will find any of your MD numbers, and it will even find text in the help option of the parameters. What it won't search is the actual input field. So if you were looking for a desired value to try to find your MD, it does not search in that input field.
Good point. Thanks, Chris. Yeah. And also, I think if you search for text, it will include this text that you see at the bottom,
exactly,
which is a little bit of a description of that parameter.
That's kind of what I meant about the help.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yep. And then, of course, you always can go to the help screen, as we depicted earlier. So. Let's see, and there we have it. So now we have, we're at the question and answer.
And we got a ton of questions here. So certainly I'm in no rush. We don't have to end at 3:30. We're just going to start banging through the questions. So if you guys put in a question, hang out. We're going to try to get to all of them, and we'll take it from there. So I'm going to go through the chat window first, and then we'll drop down to the Q&A panel because we have questions in both. Tim did mention, I guess, when I asked about up-and-coming events, that maybe we should look at doing rotary table integration or maybe robotic integration. Great idea. We'll have to put that on the short list to see if we can put that into some of our rotations. Okay. So here we go from Troy, it looks like. Can an NC archive be created and then reloaded in the reset the password back to default? So I think he's referring to what you talked about. But you have to be loading an archive that did not have it changed. Right?
Oh, no, it doesn't store the archive or the password in the archive. So the procedure again is first thing I would do is I would make an archive. Number one, I would make an NC archive. Then I would load in a default archive, and then
yeah, you got to load the default archive. That's the key. That's what's switching it back, right?
No, actually, you can load in.
I don't think if you just reload the same archive, it's not going to delete those passwords.
Yeah, because the passwords aren't stored in the archive.
You might have to do an NC clear though to do it.
Oh, I don't know.
It would be interesting to double check that. I think you got to do. I think you're going to have to either do. I think you have to do an NC clear to get rid of that. I think what's happening is that's stored to internal variables, right? So if you just reload the archive again, it'll maintain that custom password. I'm pretty sure. We can look into that more for you, Troy. All right. Without turning the control off and back on, what's the best and easiest way to tell if it is a 840D solution line or an HMI solution line HMI advanced or solution line operate? And this is from Steve.
Okay, so you can go into menu select and diagnostics and go right to version. All right. And that's going to tell you up here, it's going to say operate. And then there's the version number.
And I want to say that key strike the key set path will not work in HMI advanced, right? Because it's in a different spot.
Yes.
That's another giveaway if they can't find the version button.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. Anything that we did today specifically there's different ways to get at some of the same features in HMI Advanced as opposed to Operate. A lot of the features are available, not all of them. A lot of them are, but the way that you access them is somewhat different. So that would be a whole different webinar, and that's before my time, so I don't have a lot of background in HMI.
You know, the other telltale giveaway that to me, if I'm not sure if a guy is looking at HMI Advanced or Operate, go to Jog, Steve. So back in, can you switch to Jog for me? There we go. So back in the HMI Advanced days, if they were in the Jog area, there's a button called scratching. And scratching is really the set work coordinate button that you see here now. So if anybody says they got a soft key button that says scratching, it's HMI Embedded or HMI Advanced, because we got rid of that when we went to Operate. Now, the one area where you could be on the older hardware and software platform, but things look like Operate, is if you're on a solution line system that had HMI, either Advanced or Embedded, with the additional shop mill or shop turn software. So that gets a little trickier, because back then, shop mill and shop turn were actually an add-on software package that looked almost identical to Operate. So that's where there could be some differences. So if that's the case, then certainly use Steve's trick about trying to navigate to that versions button and check to see if it says Operate, or look at the version number as well, because the version numbers are totally different between HMI days and the current Operate. Okay. Adam, would you recommend making an archive if you're just changing the fans or the batteries? Go for it, Steve.
I would definitely make an archive, because if the battery is low, you're going to lose information. When you remove that battery, if the power's off on the control, you're going to lose information. So I definitely would recommend making an archive before changing the battery. Again, it's a simple procedure, and just stick that USB stick in there and do the Control-Alt-C, and you're good to go.
Or S. Yeah,
S on the 840.
Yep.
And then,
well, on both of them, Control-Alt-S always.
Yeah.
Yeah, now, do you remember, because I'm trying to remember it's been a while since I've trained the service content, how long can you have the battery unplugged from the NCU before it actually loses?
I think
there is a capacitor there.
Yeah, and I think it's less than a minute, put it that way. I don't know exactly how long it is, but you do have some time. But you definitely don't have time to go get a cup of coffee. That's for sure. So
exactly.
I would recommend just making an archive, because what happens if you take the battery out and you get distracted, or you trip and fall, or who knows. So always a good idea to have an archive.
That's right. Yeah, I know from past experience, it can be up to a couple minutes, but I wouldn't rely on that for sure. So I totally agree with Steve. Absolutely. Archive. You can never make enough archives. This is one from Steve. You should stop the PLC by switching it to number 2 before reading archive. And is it important to reset or clear the data before reading in a new archive?
By clearing...
reading in an NC archive. He's referring to an NC archive specifically. So you know how we can clear the NC?
Yeah. No, I don't think that that's necessary. Like the reset procedure for the NC, I think is what he's referring to. Yeah, so that's not necessary for restoring an NC archive. That's necessary to do a real reset of the NC, which may be necessary under certain circumstances. And that's something that certainly we hope to get into more detail in a later webinar.
Absolutely. Yeah, what I would say is, if I'm reloading an NC archive because I'm trying to switch a parameter back to something previous, or I'm doing a memory reorder, generally there I'm not too worried about clearing the NC. But if I have something that's failing in the control, like, there are some back-end variables that don't get rewritten by just the NC load, then I might want to do a full clear. So if there's weird behavior going on, that's time, then you're going to do a full reset, and that's where you would consider doing the clear. But if it's just something simple like a memory reorder or just switching back to an older one because of a parameter change, I wouldn't worry about it. Okay, we keep on going here. Is the user view soft key only available on 4.7? I don't remember seeing that key on previous software versions. This is from Mike.
So the user views is available in 4.5, and it may be that that particular key was hidden, because you can go into the software and hide certain keys. I don't know why anybody would hide that, but user views are available in 4.5.
Yeah, I don't remember when they weren't available. Even like 4.4 and 2.7 days, I think they were there. Maybe it came out in 4.5, but I don't think so. One of the cool things, though, and Steve didn't get a chance to delve into that user view, is you can actually then move that user view setup from machine to machine. So there's actually a file it creates. So you can put it on a USB stick. So if you want to have, like, maybe your service guys are always going to the same set of parameters and you don't want to have them digging through all those parameters, it's possible to actually have a file that they bring that'll set up, and then the name of the file will be what you have, that setup milling, setup turning. You can call it anything you want. So this is a completely custom area for you. And certainly, like, you're a service guy and you always want to look at parameters that are, specific to maybe backlash and some tuning values. And it can be a combination of all of the parameters. That's the other nice part too, right? So it can have a general MD, a channel, and a couple axes, an SD, totally customizable.
Yeah.
All right, and maybe something we can get into in a further one.
Certainly.
Okay. We have James was thanking us and telling us to have a great weekend. Thank you, James. I know you had to go. When you press the menu select, the HMI Advanced will have service soft keys. Yes, that's a good point. That's from Troy. So that's another kind of dead giveaway, right? If you hit menu select on an HMI Advanced system, if you're running HMI Advanced software, again, that's one thing that if you have shop mill or shop turn and you're booted to that, then it's going to look more like operate. Because really, all operate is we use the HMI appearance from shop mill and shop turn, but we added all of the functionality that you could do in HMI Advanced and kind of merged the two together. So we thought the look and feel and navigation of shop mill shop turn in the old classic days was certainly easier for users, but we also need to get all the stuff that that software couldn't do back then. That's really what operate became. So it looks like Danny was saying you only lose it if you have it out too long. I would assume he's probably talking about the battery, I would guess.
So that's going to also depend on how low that battery is. Well, now I guess it wouldn't matter where the state it was in, but as a battery drops down, it does lose. They become less efficient, and you can run into all kinds of issues.
And those two different alarms is the dead giveaway, right? If you're in that first alarm series, you can comfortably shut the machine down without the fear of losing anything. Once you go to that different alarm number, when you said, it got to the lowest voltage range, that's basically telling you if you shut the power off to that control and you leave it off for more than a couple minutes, it's going to lose everything.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the.
And you may not have a couple of minutes. You don't know.
You may not. You don't know. Well, yeah, you have whatever the capacitors will do. So it's really the same time that you have when you're removing the fan module, right? Because you always have those capacitors. So however long it takes for them to bleed off. And that will vary between capacitor, right? No two capacitors are identical. I always make an archive. Please advise regarding battery. I've always been told Siemens is making the planet greener, not using a battery. Data is stored on the CF card. I'm not sure. He might be referring to an 828. So
nope.
The 840 has a battery. The 828 does not. So in an 828, we have what's called non-volatile memory. So you should be able to you should never lose memory on 828 unless you're having a hardware failure. So maybe that's what you mean. But all 840s, to my knowledge, have a battery backup for that memory. All right. Let's go down a little further. Thank you, and thank you, Adam. Only talking 828, okay, and 828 basic, but never heard of battery super capacity. Yes, so that's back to what we were just saying. If you're on an 828, there's no battery issue. This is only 840 specific topics. Now, early 828s, but it was like literally first generation. The capacitor in it was volatile. So if you left the machines off for longer than a couple weeks, they could lose their memory. Actually, that was a problem we had in the 802 days. It was just the way we designed the system. So then you'd want to make sure you had a backup if you were going to leave the machine down for more than a couple weeks. But that is no longer a thing with 828s. You can shut them down for 2 years and they'll come right back up. Is it better to order the battery and the fan all in one unit? Oh, no. I mean, you can get that little battery just clips in. But I think you got to get it from us, right, Steve? That's a proprietary battery, I think.
Yeah, you can't just replace it with an off-the-shelf battery, because you wouldn't be able to find it. So you do need to put the exact same battery in there. So as far as I know, it's not available anywhere else. And obviously, that's a battery. It's not terribly expensive, so it's good to just get that right through Siemens. Maybe keep a couple of those on the shelf, because the shelf life of those batteries is, I think it's good for at least 7 or 8 years. So
this is interesting. So Troy was responding back, and if I'm reading his message, Troy's one of our service guys on our hotline, by the way, for those of you that are on the call. And what Troy was saying is, it looks like Doc on CD is saying that you can unplug the battery for a period up to 15 minutes before that capacitor fully bleeds off.
Really?
Suppose that's documented. Yeah. I knew it was a few minutes. I didn't know it was 15. So that's good to know, Troy. But either way, the reality here is, the minute you unplug that battery, be prepared to replace it relatively quickly, or you don't want to just pull it out and let it sit. Okay. Backup time. All right. 840.c. Okay. A lot of thank yous, a lot of acknowledgments on what we said already. Perfect. Let me go down to the Q&A section. That was just the chat, mind you. Tim likes In-N-Out burgers too. Mike wonders why you guys are using Sprouts on everything. I wonder that myself. Back to some of the things we were joking about before. All right. Where can I find the link to the Excel spreadsheet you guys mentioned at the beginning of the email list? Okay, so that Excel spreadsheet, if you go to our CNC for You website, go to training, and then go to the virtual CNC training. It's right there on the bottom of the page. If for any reason you can't find it, shoot me an email, and I would be happy. You should have my email from the email blast. I'd be happy to send you the file directly or give you the link. Hello, is there a way to display the PLC program in an 840 screen? In the 828 is available, and that is a correct statement. The 828 does have a PLC viewer / editor. 840 by default does not. So I would say, Stephen, you can correct me if I'm wrong. The only way I know of doing this would be if you had the Windows variant. So if you had a PCU50 or an IPC running Windows, it's possible to actually have a licensed copy of Step 7 installed there. And then you could view and modify the PLC at the control, but it gets pretty costly adding all those extra hardware components. Other than that, I don't know of any other way.
Yeah, not only that, you have to be extremely careful when you download the PLC from from the 840, because you can really get in a lot of trouble if you don't know exactly what you're doing. For example, if you download the PLC project into step 7 and you look at it, you don't make any changes, and you upload it back into the control, well, guess what? You've likely just hosed the system, because there are certain files that aren't transferred back and forth. So it's always good to have, if you're going to make any changes into the PLC, it's always good to have the OEM involved in those decisions ahead of time, because on another aspect, OEM, they don't necessarily want all these different versions of PLCs floating around in different machines. Once it's been edited by somebody else other than themselves, then if there's a problem, they're not dealing with the exact same PLC project. So it's always best to have the original project from the OEM if you're going to download the PLC into step 7.
Yeah, I can't agree more. And keep in mind too, the 840 PLC is a much more complex PLC than an 828, right? 828 is just ladder. 840 is ladder. It's a message statement. It's it's like what, 4 different formats of PLC structure that we can use in an 840. Yeah. So you can do a lot more with it, and it's designed to run much more complex machines. But because of that, it's not something that you would necessarily want to be manipulating at the control. Yeah. If you just have ladder, it's a hell of a lot easier for sure, but it's a lot more limited.
But I would add there are ways to look at specific I/O in the 840 right at the control. So you can't see really the logic, but you can look at the I/O by going to this NCPLC variables, and then you can load in the inputs and the outputs if you know what they are, and then you can check the status of them. For example, in here I think so the x-axis. You can see the status to bit on the far right is changing when I'm changing when I'm pressing the button down below. You can see this bit change. So you can look at the status of those. You can even go a bit further and use the trace functionality to see what bits are changing when. And it's really a useful tool. But it's best to reference the manual from the builder that's going to tell you exactly what what the I/O is. There are ways that you can insert certain variables, PLC variables, and things like that in there as well. But that can be a little complex, knowing which are the right ones. But that tool is available in the 840 for looking at specific I/O, for example, like a tool change or something like that. You might look at the manual and then see what the I/Os are related to the PLC or to the tool change, and then run the tool change and watch those I/Os change either through the trace function or through the NC PLC variables.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we had talked about showing that, and we knew we wouldn't have enough time today to get into this, but keep an eye out for further content, because that's a very important thing. And really, the reality is, once you know how to use this and the scope tool, you shouldn't need to go on the PLC. I know a lot of people are used to dealing with poorly written PLCs, but generally, if you get to a builder that's building an 840, it's a different ball of wax entirely. Okay, so we do have a question if we're going to get into tuning. Unfortunately, not today out of lack of time, but we would like to follow this up with some tuning topics in the future, so keep an eye out. How can a customer create a backup on a spare CF card in case there is a card failure? And that's a tricky scenario, because although you could have a backup, your licenses aren't there, right? Because the licenses are linked to your serial number of your unique CF card. So in theory, you could have a CF card that's completely installed, has all the machine parameters, everything's set, but none of the licenses, and then you would have to actually switch the licenses over It's not that big a process, to be honest with you. You can call our hotline. I think you can even do it from the website yourself, but you would have to transfer all the licenses on that are attached to their old CF card to the new one before that thing would be usable. The only other thing I could say you could do with that is we come 4/7, we had a slightly different change in our licensing strategy. Steve, go back to licenses real quick, because we do have temporary licenses, and you have up to 6 you can activate. So in that case, as long as you're running 4/7 or newer, yeah, go to the license screen. Yeah, back out one. As long as you're running 4/7 or newer, you could not transfer the licenses yet, but still get that card running. See where it says that the activate test license. It's gray right now, but it's just above the reset PO. You obviously can't do it in Sinutrain. You don't need to, but you can activate that up to 6 times, and then all options will work for the period of time that that's active. And on an 840, Steve, do you remember? It's like 1,000 hours or something crazy.
Yeah,
Per
it starts.
license,
Yeah,
per
there's.
6. It's a lot.
Yeah, and there's 3 different. So it starts out at, I think, 1,000, and we're assuming that none of those licenses were used by the builder when they were setting up
Right.
the machine, testing it, and those types of things. And then there's like a stage 2, which has less hours, and then a stage 3, which point you're down to maybe 100 or so hours. And you do one thing about the test licenses, you will get the message popping up that you are running a test license, and it's temporary.
Perfect.
So, but it is another way to use that CF card.
For sure. So Matt asked us, how do I build an archive on a real machine specifically for creating a machine in Sinutrain? And that's a very good point. So there are 2 MDs. You want to show them real quick, Steve?
Yeah.
MD 11210 and 11212 that you do need to make sure you set. So go to, oh, you already have them. Perfect.
Yeah.
So these 2 MDs, you want to set them both to 0. And what that's going to do is that's going to ensure that the archive the system builds is a total or a complete archive. You need to have that when you're going to build a Sinutrain machine. As long as those 2 are set, then it'll work with something as minimal as just an NC archive. But generally speaking, we suggest giving us everything. If you give it to me with the PLC and the drive parameters in it, then Sinutrain will actually take those values into account. And you can actually go as far as even include the HMI if you have custom screens. And depending on how the custom screens were written by the OEM, they may actually even show up in Sinutrain. So that's going to depend on the OEM. Now, that process, and then it's going to be the normal process I showed you before of going in and creating the archive and giving it a name. That process is specific to the 840. Now with the 828, unfortunately, the read-in tool in Sinutrain requires an ARC archive, not an ARD. I remember we said by default, 828 builds an ARD. So in that case, that's why we give you the Control-Alt-C function in the 828. So you still have to set those 2 parameters in an 828, but you can't build it as normal. You do just put a USB in the port, Control-Alt-C, it'll dump an ARC archive, and then from there we can build you. But if you're going to build it in Sinutrain, you do need to have that option, or send us the archive, and I can send you a set file. Let's say we got some great questions, and a lot of them. I'm really glad the guys got a lot out of this. So Jared, my machine is in the manufacturer level now. How do I switch it to the user level? Steve, you want to jump over to Sinutrain? All right. So the big trick here, while Steve's going over there, I'll explain it to reduce time. You got to delete the active password, because if not, it's going to be stuck in manufacturer all the time. So you just nope, back out one screen. I think you're. I know you're in alarms setup. Menu select setup. So by going and deleting, it's going to go put it to its lowest level. Hit the back arrow out. Your back button right there. Next one up, just under the read the license key, you're still in. Yeah, hit that back out. Yeah. Okay, so click password. You see where it says delete password? So that's the magic button. Hit delete, Steve. Yep, say okay. I know it sounds like it's doing something really bad, but it's not. It's just putting you to your lowest access level. So then if you go back to password and set password, you type in customer and it'll go to the user level and that'll get you there, or evening and it'll go to the service level. Anything below that, it's going to use the key switch on the front of the machine or the key fob if you're running a DMG machine to drive those password levels. Does running the circularity tests also automatically update the backlash parameters? No, circularity does nothing but give you a window into how the machine is moving around. Then from there, it's going to be up to you to change different values and then use the circularity test to give you a response of that. So it's just like a ball bar, right? It's just giving you a graphical representation of what either the uncoders are doing or the scales are doing. And Steve, I know you're with DMG, so you always have scales. So you would want to look at it. You might want to look at it both too, because then this way you see what's happening on the physical axes with the scale feedback, measuring system 2. But you could also look at it to see what the motor is doing too. Michael says, so battery did not get changed while the control is powered on. No, we suggest anything you're doing in the cabinet, you should have things in a powered off state. Is it better to order the battery and the fan as one unit? I think we already mentioned that, but no, you can order just the battery. From an OEM's point of view, don't change the PLC program. I think Dave works for an OEM, and I would agree with him. The CF card has to come from Siemens. Yes, that's true, because it's a serial number CF card. Is there a version from Sinumerik ARC, which runs on Windows 10 to view and extract a series startup archive? I would say use Access My Machine if you want to do that, right, Steve?
Yeah, that's what I always use.
I've never used Sinumerik. I've heard of it. I think it's an older piece of software, Sinumerik.
Yeah,
but
before my time.
Yeah, currently Access My Machine is the piece of software. It used to be called RCS Commander. That was the previous version. But that allows us to get into the control, but you can also build archives through it remotely and tunnel in either through X127 or X130. Matt, NC memory is typically so minimal, like our machine, which is about 10 megabytes or less after all the parameter cons are loaded. I understand that there are options. Just curious what by default it's so low in a megabyte, not gigabyte. So that's a true statement as far as NC memory. But of course, you can have a local drive, and then the local drive by default, I think, is what, 2 gig? I think it is. And then from there, memory options can build from that segment. But you are right. The standard high-speed internal NC memory maxes out, I think, as a max of 15 meg. But you don't have to have programs on that. You can run a program from anywhere. You want to run it from USB, you can, from a network drive for sure. And actually, Matt was asking if you were in Cypress, California, Steve. So, no, a little south of Cypress, right? You're down by San Diego.
Right.
And then Matt was asking, can you please explain, I think it was, yeah, this is based on his previous question as far as why the NC memory is so slow or so small. Just why so low? So, I mean, it's a hard thing to say. I mean, I know our internal NC memory is extremely high speed memory. So I don't know if it's just a cost case. I mean, it's not like the memory's in there and you can just open it up. It's probably because it's proprietary memory, to be honest with you. But again, our memory allocation does allow me to run programs from anywhere. And now if you do need to have your programs running in NC memory, in the latest 4.7 and then certainly in 4.8, we have the NC extend and then the execute from external storage, where now you can map external memories and let the control treat them as NC memories. So really this isn't an issue anymore, but it does depend on how the machine is configured. So we could always talk about that further. I did see a couple of people typing some stuff up top. Let me check real quick. Okay, so this was from Mike. From 4.7 on 820, is it not possible to transfer the license key from an archive? For example, if I'm trying to upgrade software versions for CF card failure. Yeah, so the licenses don't go with the archive. It's physically attached. Well, actually, let's restate that. That's slightly different. So Steve, go to the license screen real quick. So the way our licenses work, setup. You went to diagnostics. Yeah, we've gotten way deeper than we were expecting, but this is great. Okay, so you see this giant long key? So this is like your Windows license key. So this is a unique key that basically links what options are available, and that's linked to the serial number of the CF card. So the archive carries this key, but the key has to match the CF card. That's why the archive itself can't do anything when you put a new CF card in. You need to recreate this key, and that key, in conjunction with its known internal CF card serial number, that would be to the right of where it says st-p120_host, that's what triggers everything to turn on. So, although the key follows, the key's not going to help you. You have to get a new key. But again, it's just a matter of relinking the license files to a new CF card serial number, and then a new key gets generated, plug the key in, and the CF card is up and going. So it's actually a lot more painless than it might sound. Opening an ARD file in WordPad and finding license key normally works to enter the entering license key after software upgrade. Well, software upgrade, as long as you're on the same CF card, you lose your license key. In fact, I usually will generally just reload the archive I had during the software upgrade. This will still work in 4.7, or must we contact the service center hotline? So generally, when I do a software upgrade, and Steve, you can tell me if you do anything different, but I'll do the upgrade, and if during the upgrade it requires me to reload the archive, I actually will load the archive from the previous software version, and it works fine, and I don't have to even mess with the license key at all. It handles it.
And that's fine. And as part of upgrading the software, reloading the software, you do have the option to back up the license key to a file as well. So
you can, yeah. Right, actually, right where you're. Actually, on our software, yeah, on the website, you can create it to a file, yeah. And that's where the read in license key button that you're showing right above back comes in. So there's no real change in an 828 from version 4.7 to 4.8 or anything like that. I think we got everybody. If I missed it, by all means, shoot us an email. You should have my email. Steve, you want to show your last screen there? We'll show your email. They can always reach out to you as well. Thanks, everybody. This was great. We went a half hour over, and it was absolutely awesome conversations. We certainly appreciate it. So again, if you need help, feel free to reach out to myself or Steve or any of my other colleagues. We're certainly here to help you. And there's Steve's email, steveholmes@siemens.com, but you're supposed to have a dot in between them, no?
No.
Steve.Holmes.
Nope, that's
you don't have a dot in yours?
No, if you put a dot in my email address, then it's going to go to Stephen Holmes in the UK, and he's medical. So I get his
normally it's always first name dot last name. That's how mine is. But that's
no dot there. Definitely no dot, or I won't get it. I get his emails all the time.
I'm going to stop recording now.